Hey everyone, welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, our weekly podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, make Software Sales Simplified your go-to resource for actual insights and real-world strategies when it comes to enterprise sales. I'm your host, Matt Long, and I'm joined with my illustrious colleague, Kevin Donville.
I'm now illustrious.
You are
I'm very
indeed,
glad
sir.
to. Yeah. How you doing, sir? Good to be here with you again. This is our 18th episode now. So
It is indeed our 18th episode. We're getting to be seasoned pros.
yes, we are.
Anyway, Kevin and I both together have about 50 years of enterprise software selling experience. And every week we talk with sales leaders and industry experts on trends and topics related to enterprise sales. If I'd like to remind you just to please like, subscribe, and follow us on any of your channels where you're listening to us, we would really appreciate it. So for the past few weeks, we've had many great guests on, kind of talking about their journey and their approach to enterprise sales, as well as particular things that are affecting the industry. But today I thought we'd pivot a little bit and talk about our MOVE framework that we wrote in our book, specifically the O of MOVE, which we know is
Opportunity.
So let's take this opportunity to do that. Anyway, Kevin, I wanted to pitch it over to you first. For our listeners who are not familiar with our book and the MOVE framework, maybe we could just do a quick recap for them as to what it is.
Well, first and foremost, they really should buy the book. If you're going to follow along at home, you need to follow along at home. Stop asking us for the crib sheet, right?
Are we starting plugs this early?
We are definitely starting plugs this early, but our methodology, the MOVE framework, the letters stand for what the major pillars of it are, and stands for motive, which is all about why do they need to change? What's the challenge? Why are you there? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's motivating them to change? Opportunity. Can they change? Do they have the ability to do so? And if so, what does that look like? What will that change how will it need to be structured? V obviously stands for value. And that's all about how do you map the value your solution can deliver in a way that the customer can understand how it's going to solve that problem for them. It's all about, mapping to the solution solving lattice work there. And E is engagement, which is all about the execution of making that happen, the delivery of that value to solve the problem. MOVE. And today we're talking about opportunity, which is all about their ability to be able to change.
Thanks. And we do have a session on motive that you can find. We also have one on engagement, and we've had a couple around value. So this is our first really around opportunity. So I'm excited to cover this. And it's something that I think subconsciously good sellers address and think about, but consciously not many of them do, probably with the exception of the biggest one that almost always gets asked, which is, what would you say that is, Kevin?
Oh, well, that would have to be budget, I would have to say. That's the most important aspect.
That's right. And I mean, every SDR and AE that I know probably asks that question at the very beginning, do you have budget? Because obviously you can want to do all this stuff. If you don't have the money to purchase a solution, that's not going to happen. So that's a very good example of, what we mean by opportunity. I might want to act, but can I act? Another way of thinking of this is like, look, my goal may be to lose 20 pounds, in 3 months, right? And so I look at that and say, well, you could acquire an hour of day of exercise to do that, but I don't have an hour a day to spend. So no matter how motivated I am, even if I see the value, if I know the end results I'm going to get, if I cannot take an hour of my time every day to devote to this activity, it's not going to happen.
It's a question that we've always asked, but it's interesting. A lot of folks pay lip service. They ask like they're just checking a box. They don't really do any challenging or really diving into what does that mean and why this person thinks they have the budget to be able to execute. And there's so many factors that can go into whether or not their perception of the fact that they have budget is real or not. It's something that not only do you ask once, it's something you need to be constantly checking over the course of the engagement as you're going along.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's really the reason why this is important is because, a lot of times a seller will find out that they're motivated, they want to do stuff, they have a great outcome for them, but they fail to kind of check to see whether all these things can happen that we know have to happen to make the deal go.
Right. Exactly. And budget itself, I mean, that could also be a moving target because it's not uncommon that the customer comes into the conversation with you. They think they understand the problem. But as you're going through the discovery process with them, and it's one of the most important aspects of going through the whole motive area, that's why that part of the book is so detailed, is there can be potential threats or expansions of the scope that are necessary that you discover along the way with the customer. And you discovering it is important, but making sure the customer is now aware of it, that, hey, this is a bigger problem than you think. Hey, it's a more complicated fix than you originally assumed. Is your budget maturing along with your understanding of what you need to do in order to be able to get out of the predicament you're in or solve the problem that you're tasked with? So budget is always this moving target that can very quickly and unexpectedly change.
Yeah. And so speaking of changes, let's just address something that's happening right now, tariffs.
Oh yeah.
So, as a B2B seller, you might think, well, tariffs don't really impact me. But if you think about who you're selling to and who they're selling to, then it becomes to take on a bigger picture, right?
Mm,
More importance, such as obviously, if we're selling to Target, a solution to Target, they may be in quite a pinch right now because probably 50% of their SKUs at least come from China, right? So they're scrambling to figure out what's going on.
mm.
And that probably is going to impact your deal.
Oh yeah.
But even, if you're selling to a company that sells to Target, same thing
Hmm.
applies. They're not going
Right.
to get the deal, which in turn means you're not going to get the deal. So understanding these things, you may not know exactly how they're going to shake out, but being aware of potential risk to your deal that could be influenced by late changing things that are happening in the economy or in the world is something that would help you be much more predictable as a seller. So getting ahead of these issues is really important as a seller
Mm,
because even if you can't control what's going on, being able to really understand whether your deal can land or not is important. It's important for forecasting your pipeline as
mm.
well as where you devote your energy and your time.
Yeah, and it's important on both fronts because it's important for you, as you said, for forecastability. So from the sales perspective, it's like absolutely mission critical. But it's also important as being a good steward for the deal and a good steward of solution for the customer to make sure that they're thinking in those terms too, because it's not been uncommon for me where a customer kind of thought they had the budget. And even though we've been having conversations about how the scope was growing, the complexity was changing, how their own infrastructure wasn't ready to execute, and how that was going to inherently increase the investment on their side, sometimes the customer just doesn't come to that conclusion. And you've got to walk them down that path and make them realize there's going to be a bigger bite here. So not only A, have you secured your budget, but B, have you thought about where you're going to go get more if you need it? Because this is growing beyond the scope of what you originally thought.
Yeah, and I think it's we need to point out that there's all sorts of different types of budget. That
Mm,
when people say budget,
yeah, good point.
and there's discretionary. There's something that's tied to a strategic initiative that's already been funded for a certain amount.
Mm.
There's other stuff where it's like, well, we're going to go around hat in hand and see who we can get to buy into this thing, right? So, are there any other ones that you can think of that would be relevant?
Those are the two big ones. And to your point about we're going to go around with hat in hand, that's like, if you want to talk about red flags, that's one of them right there. Like, well, if we need more money, we'll go around and see if we'll pass the hat. No, where's the money coming from?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in my fair share of those for sure.
Yeah.
And again, it also depends on how much you got going in
Mm,
your pipeline. If that's the only deal you have, then guess what? That's where you're spending your time. But hopefully, you have more opportunities that you're looking at
mm.
where you can assess them appropriately and devote the requisite amount of time.
Yeah, and it's important to understand these things because, like Ryan, who was on last week, don't do a non-sell. If you know that the customer's understanding of the budget is not going to be sufficient, and there's just no way that's going to come home, you can't succumb to the pressure, the internal pressure inside your own sales organization to continually focus on forecasting something you know is not going to come home because the customer just can't execute, because even though the customer in their heart of hearts thinks they're ready to go with the budget, they're not, right? So
Mhm.
again, that's that stewardship, not only of the deal internally for your own company, but also as being a good steward of solution for the customer as well. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, and then another factor of this current economic climate is just economic uncertainty,
Mhm.
whether it's driven by the uncertainty around tariffs or just what the markets are going to do, or how much money companies are going to have. All these types of things can really change the way that budget is allocated or how freely companies feel they can spend. I can think of recently, a couple of years ago when there was a little bit uncertainty if we're going to recession or not. And this big customer, ours current customer, that we had a huge upsell set on the table.
Mm.
All of a sudden, 3 weeks before we were supposed to close on this new upsell, the CFO came out and said, "We have a spending freeze for the next 6 months. We're not spending on anything." Now, I don't know if there's any way that we could have predicted that or circumvented that, et cetera. So that stuff happens. But the more you can kind of get in front of some of these things, whether it's looking at their K1s or whatever they're doing if they're a public company, or just looking at the industry in general and just floating these things by your champion or your sponsor and say, "Hey, I see that there looks like there's some new regulatory things that are coming in the EU. Is that going to affect you guys at all? Do we have to be concerned about that?"
Yeah, you always have to be looking down the road for the customer and be there. You have to be not just their sounding board, but you almost have to be guardian angel, I guess, where you have to be anticipating where there could be threats that they haven't considered. So you were just talking a moment ago about that whole thing about passing the hat and so forth. You sometimes have to anticipate that there's going to be that kind of a problem. And then part of the partnership, working with your champion to come up with strategies to help them secure the budget they have. So like in economic times where there's a lot of fear, how do you make sure that your budget doesn't get reprioritized at the last minute and away from you? Okay, so how can we just proactively be shoring that up and making sure the executives are on board? And additionally, when you're starting to reach out, how can you build the case if you can't afford not to do this? And how can you get more people on board who are going to be benefactors of the project to not only back your budgetary allotment, but maybe even provide some of their discretionary fund over to you to help push it along and cement the deal in so they can secure some of that benefit and get some of that ownership of the win when it happens inside the organization. And that all starts with the discovery and understanding what that power structure looks like, which we'll get to a little bit later on, obviously.
Yeah, I think the last thing to talk about with budget, and this is specifically relevant to SaaS companies, is that it's not just this year's budget you need to secure, it's
Mm,
next year's and the following years. And you don't know how that's going to play out, but understanding where that money's coming from, how it's funded, who owns it,
mm,
that can change in a year. And there's nothing worse than selling this deal, getting it implemented, starting to get value of it, and also getting the rug pulled out from under you next year. This is stuff to consider. A lot of times it's beyond your control, and sometimes you don't even know. But
right.
if you can get ahead of that, that's something also to consider because of the impact of having a SaaS deal just stop after a year.
And you're so true. I mean, as much as the whole thing about being able to get 3-year deals, which was kind of common when you and I were first coming up the ranks.
Hmm.
Nowadays, how many people have we talked to that have come onto the show that is like that's a thing of the past? Everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people treat SaaS deals now. The first year is essentially a POC. Well, if that's true, and it is, your securing of year 2 and 3 of the budget is predicated on your execution of this deal. Did you define the problem correctly? Do you understand how you're going to prove that you're delivering the value? Are you delivering the value correctly? And have you done it in a way that the organization you're delivering it to, your customer, can communicate that up? That's all about all of the aspects of our methodology play out, and we talk about that in the book about how the handshake is, from how each piece is so important to empowering the next step of the methodology to ensure your success over time.
Yeah. So speaking of time, I think it's a good segue into our
I,
next.
I just teed that one up for you.
I do like that, how you teed that up for me. Segue into the next major component when it comes to opportunity is just the time. I
Yeah.
mentioned like finding time to exercise. And if you can't find the time, you're not going to exercise. Same thing with businesses. If they don't have the time to execute, or if there's a compressed window in which they have to deliver, and you just look at that and say, there's no way that's going to happen, that puts
Hmm.
things at risk as well. So let's talk a little bit about the time factors that are involved when it comes to opportunity and whether someone could actually act or not.
Well, there's three major sections of that. There's three major areas of where time is relevant to this conversation and their ability to execute. And you hit on a couple of them, but let's just call them out, right? Buying. Do they have time to buy? There's times where it's like, hey, that budget is got a shelf life. If you don't use that by December 31st, you lose all of that budget. Okay. So stuff like that. So do they have time to execute? Do they have time to get through procurement? Do they have time to go through the security reviews? Do they have time to go through legal, all that stuff in order to be able to hit the second area of that time commitment, which is, do you have time to implement? Will you have enough time to do that? If there's a regulatory compliance thing coming along, let's say June 1st, we're going to have a whole new requirement for security, and you're selling the security solutions to help them get there. Is there enough time to implement that in order for them to be in compliance? You have to work your way backwards from that date. So being able to go and not only know, do they have time to buy it in time to protect themselves? Do they have enough runway to execute it? And all of that factors into the plan you need to put forward in front of your customer. And that's all anchored to the compelling event that you need to come up with in discovery, either the one that you've identified that they have or the one that you've helped construct in order to anchor things like your timeline from. And the third element is, do they have time to realize the value before their deadline of doing the proving, which is like, this ties right into that thing you said about year 2 and year 3 on your budget. You need to be able to go into the budgetary meetings at the beginning of the year. Will you have enough facts? Can we deliver it in the amount of time you've given us from your implementation window for you to see that? If you don't have it, you're going to walk into that meeting with a whole bunch of hypotheticals, but no data to prove what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that there's two impacted parties from this time factor. One is your organization and potentially your job if you're not predicting things correctly in terms of when they're going to close. So it's very important to understand and they execute in this time frame, because a lot of times as sellers we're setting, let's say, artificial deadlines, but deadlines are tied to our quarter and what we need to deliver. Wishful thinking is wishful thinking. Getting them to actually execute is another thing. And if they have a committee meeting that they have to go through and it's not scheduled before the end of the quarter or scheduled the week of the end of the quarter, probably you're not getting that deal. So understanding this is important. The flip side, of course, is on their side, being able to make sure that they meet their deadlines that are very important to them and they see the value, as you mentioned. And when they don't see the value, that impacts you as well as a seller, because again, you have an unhappy customer that may churn, that may even try to claw back some of the deal or get out of it somehow. It's just all nastiness all the way around. Again, really understanding this has two benefits. It benefits you as a seller to protect your sanity and potentially your job and the integrity of your organization, as well as making your customer successful, which essentially is what we're trying to do here.
Well, yeah, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about making them successful so that,
they give you more money.
Yeah, they come back time and time again. And if they leave the organization and go on to, organization number 2, guess who's the first person they're going to call? They're going to call you because you made them so successful at the last place. So you're creating a symbiotic relationship here if you're doing this correctly and executing it well. Also with respect to that, like helping your champion set their timelines appropriately inside of that organization just makes them shine. It doesn't just protect them for this opportunity that you're working on with them, this deal that you're trying to do, but it just strengthens their political capital inside of that organization because they look like they've got themselves. There's so much more on the ball. So being able to help them factor these things out can be incredibly important. Obviously, also to your own organization, we talked about this a little bit with some of our other guests that have been on board. The forecasting has to be solid. And as much as the pressures are always there to kind of push the forecasting, get to the more, agreeable type of forecasting so that it looks good on paper, at the end of the day, you need to deliver. And if you're setting yourselves up for timelines that can't be delivered upon, you're just setting yourself and everybody in the chain of command up above you up for potential failure if that's not going to come to fruition. Or even if you win once, you won't get the second deal. You certainly won't get the third. So it's critical from that perspective. Wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah. And I think moving to the third component, I think we'll spend the most time here because this affects everything.
Yeah.
It's just around power. Who has the power to affect change? Because it affects budget, it affects time, it affects all these different types of things. So when we talk about power, it's really understanding who has the ability to affect the change. There's the influence of change and actually who has the ability to make the decision. and could really control that. And a lot of times, the person you're working with does not have the power. And the worst thing is finding out later in the deal that someone had power for a critical element that you were unaware of, and that kills your deal. And
Yeah,
a great example I can think of is someone in IT. The business
absolutely.
wants to move, they have the money to move. The guy who's in charge of this database and moving it to this other platform says, nope, we're not doing that. And then it kills everything. So let's talk about kind of some of the areas where you need to be aware of the power and some of the ways that manifests itself in a deal or in a company organization.
Well, you already hit on two of the big ones. Who's making the decision? So that's the clean cut one. If everything goes according to formula based on what the customer's expectations are, who checks the box, who signs the check? But the other one is when there are problems, challenges, or potential objections and roadblocks that could derail or extend your deal, who has the power to shepherd that through on the customer's side? That's an important conversation to have because more often than not, and your mileage may vary, but I think Matt and I are probably on the same page here, that it's not uncommon for there to be something that gets in the way. The one you brought up, IT says no. Well, why? Who gave IT carte blanche to be able to do that? But legal, procurement, security, performance teams, executives, the financial department, all these different areas in some way, shape, or form, potentially hold a trump card where they can drop it on the table and suddenly your hand is no good anymore. And now you need to recalculate. So working with your champion to anticipate all those potential threats operationally or structurally and politically is important to help them navigate so that when you detect one or you suspect one, you can work on a plan. Well, who do we need to go talk to who has the power to take that away from them? So if it's the IT department, who is above them that we can go talk to, that we can use to help negate that potential threat to this deal? And equally so, when you're going through the discovery process, you may find there are technical barriers, operational barriers, business barriers to your ability to actually deliver the project. So who can you be working with? Your champion, your champion's champion? Who inside the organization has a stake in helping navigate around that? Understanding in some cases, elegant lattice work of power that makes up these organizations is critically important to not only getting the deal done, but dealing with threats against it.
Yeah, I think of the three areas that we talked about: budget, time, and power. Power may be the one that you can have the most influence over. Not
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to change people's minds if they're in power, but by being able to identify the power structure in the chain of command, you
Mm-hmm.
can mitigate a lot by really diving into that. I mean, if they don't have budget, they don't have budget. You can get creative with them in certain ways, maybe to find budget or to do the payment plans or whatever to fit their model, but you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of limited there. Same thing with
Sure.
time. I mean, if they have a specific time, you can set a very good outline and schedule and timeline and sequence of events that can help get them along for an organization that's a little dysfunctional. You can do that. With power, you can find out who actually is in control to the best of your ability, and then have specific strategies and tactics around getting in touch with those people and getting them on your side, or at least smoothing it a bit so that it doesn't jeopardize your deal. So I think that's one of the things that as a seller, really spending time here can have you have the most impact in terms of your ability to be successful in your opportunities.
Right. And then we're right back to where we started from earlier on, where it comes right down to the discovery that you're executing to ferret out who those people are. And this is why discovery never stops. You're
Mhm.
constantly executing on this because as the deal matures, as you learn more, there's going to be more questions, more things you need to be able to find out in many cases. And it's interesting because, we've used the term champion a couple of times as we've been talking about your marshaling point to go out and deal with any one of these things. It's interesting that your champion can lose power or with respect to other challenges, not have power to be able to help you. Like with respect to dealing with the IT department, they may have all the power they need to help negate that. You can work on a strategy together and execute. But if it has to come down to something from legal, Well, they may not have the power to be able to do that. They become an influencer now, and they have to partner with you to go and find a person to champion that cause inside of the organization. And understanding that constant moving target with respect to how things are working inside that organization and who holds the keys to what is a challenging thing. But to your point, is the area where the salesperson can often have the highest degree of influence on the outcome of the deal.
Yeah. So when we think about, when you assess the opportunity of someone to act, you've done all these things around the motive and building the business case. We've talked about those
Mhm.
types of things. And then it's really incumbent upon you to evaluate each one of these and put a lens on it. It's like, can they do this? And that's essentially what opportunity is, because, as you're building the structure for understanding the deal and the best ways to move it forward, ignoring these things or not being aware of these things can just sidetrack you in an instant. So what are some of the red flags, I guess, you've seen in a sales pursuit, where, all of a sudden a red flag around opportunity has come up?
There are a lot, but I'd say let's talk about some of the ones I think they're the most insidious. What I mean by that is they can be the most disruptive, but yet they're the easiest ones for you to have gotten in front of. So one of the most common ones I've run into is security. I've seen it come to the point where procurement is signed off, everybody's ready to sign. They're talking about, putting wet ink on the bottom of the contract. And that's when security goes, wait a minute, we just heard that you're buying this solution. We've not been brought to the table. And the brakes just get slammed on. And now you're in 90 days of going through security reviews. Anytime you get an answer that is, oh, we don't have to worry about that, or that's already been decided, unless you can validate beyond a shadow of a doubt that it has been, consider the question still open. So security is one of the ones, like I said, where it happens all the time. Well, we don't need to worry about that. We're not under that purview. Well, yeah, let's
Yeah.
validate that.
Yeah, security for sure. I mean, that's one thing. If you're selling enterprise tech and
Mm,
it touches anything in the organization, you're going to have to talk with security at some point. And when your champion or sponsor says, "Oh no, that's okay. We don't have to do that," that's when you need to push back, because both you and I have seen that being technical sellers that
oh yeah.
happens.
Oh yeah.
Legal is another one.
Definitely.
Depending upon the nature of your solution, the type of data that's collected, especially if it's private information of some sort, that is really a sticky topic right now. Making sure that you have compliance and legal on your side is important. I mean, I've seen it a lot too, where let's say you're doing a demo, or you're planning for a demo or the next presentation or conversation, and your sponsor's very excited. Say, "Oh, I'm going to get so and so involved. Invite them in too," right? It's like, "Oh, that's great, great. Who is this person?
Right.
Why are we involving them? What is their say in this?"
Mm,
Understanding that is really important. Like, I just want my IT guys to be aware of it, so I'm going to bring them in. Okay, well, you can't just stop there. You have to understand, well, who are they? Who do they report up to? What is their influence in this? What do they care about? And if you need to have a separate meeting with them afterwards, the IT
right.
people, make sure you do that, because these are all indicators that there's people beyond your influence. But you have a good idea going in. When you sell enough to enterprise, like, who are the main people that you need to make sure are on your side? And it's incumbent upon you to do that.
Another one that kind of can be a bit of a red flag is when you talk, let's say you have a solution that has the potential to plug into a lot of other tools inside that organization. And you have obviously the technical due diligence conversation with them, which is, are you going to need to integrate with A, B, or C? And they're like, yeah, well, that won't be in scope for the first deal. And you know that the vast majority of your customers are doing that kind of an integration. That's a major red flag in my book, because that indicates to me that potentially this person doesn't understand the importance of that integration in the solution that they need and the problems that they need fixing. And it's been more often than not over the course of evaluation, somebody else brings it to the fore. And now suddenly it becomes a 5 alarm fire that can take the entire deal sideways, as everyone scrambles to address this technical question that was kind of laissez-faire passed off on very early on. Or they say that, yes, the integration will need to take place, and don't worry, we already have that integration partner already to help you guys execute. But yet they don't want to facilitate the conversation between the two of you. That's
Yeah.
another point.
Yeah, I've totally seen that as well. I want to pivot a little bit here now and talk about, if you do find out that they don't have the opportunity to execute on one of these areas, what can you do? When I think about in the past where we've run into these things, they don't have the budget for this type of thing, or the
Right.
timeline is too condensed, they can't execute, or we don't have the buy-in from this person. One option is to condense the scope of your deal.
Mhm.
Well, how much budget signing authority do you have? If we came in under this and just targeted your organization, would you be able to execute? And then we don't have to address those things. So that's one way. I mean, sales leaders often don't like that because you're reducing the scope of the deal. But at the same time, getting that deal done, especially the
Right.
initial deal with a new customer, has a huge upside, right? So when we think about some of the ways to mitigate it, that's the first one that comes to mind for me is lower the scope of what you're trying to do, make it much more palatable, easier to implement, less people involved, right? So that you can actually get it done. And once you get it done, you can work on building that. And then it's a lot easier, right, to go out through the organization, show them a working example of how it's improving part of the organization.
Mhm.
That's an easier sell.
You're absolutely right. And that I've had that happen a number of times too. And when you have a champion that works with you, that's really the green flag in that situation is a person that's going to sit down with you and restructure the answer to the problem with you. They're going to partner with you to figure that out. It's interesting because as I was listening to you bring it up, I remember where I've seen times where that's happened. And your champion, when you go to them with that epiphany, with that realization and the facts to support what you're saying, which is you don't have enough time, you don't have enough budget, you don't have the authority to get this done, whatever that is, you can find there that you don't have a champion anymore. Your champion either turned out to not really be a champion because they push back and they're like, no, this decision is going to stay with me. No, we're not going to go talk to anybody else. No, I'm not going to go and engage other departments. And if you know that that is going to result in a dead deal, that person's gone from being your champion to being your blocker. And that could become structurally and politically a very difficult outcome for this salesperson to have to deal with as they now have to go and navigate a way to find a champion to get around this block, this problem that they have without alienating the person that up until now has been providing them with so much support to get through the deal. It can be very, very challenging.
Yeah, and especially I've seen a lot of times where your sponsor or champion says, "Oh no, I got it. I can get this done. I can get this done." Right, and then
Right.
you want to believe them because you like them. They're intelligent, and you believe they can get it done. But you need to check other things as well because I've had that happen a lot too, where you get to the final step and say, "Ah, CFO didn't approve it, man. Sorry." And it's like,
Well, the phrase that I've heard brought up in rooms with you and I in it, which is you got to apply the Reagan philosophy: trust but verify. It's like, yeah, okay, you said you could do that. Great, I believe you. Let's go validate that, shall we? Let's go and prove that that's actually going to happen because there's so much at stake, not just your deal, but also potentially the political standing you have inside that organization and that person's political standing inside of their organization if this deal suddenly goes sideways.
yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is the move framework is not necessarily, new concepts when it comes to sales, but I think what really makes it stand out in my mind and the feedback I've gotten from others is that it creates a framework, structure, a lattice in which to hang all these different elements of the deal and then evaluate them from different lenses so that you can continue moving down a path towards execution of that deal and success.
Mhm.
So, opportunity is just a way to kind of look at all these things that you've gathered and really think critically. If can this thing happen based upon what I know? And if I'm unsure, what missing bits of information do I need to get to the
Mhm.
next phase? So it's just a structured approach in which to do this. It ties nicely with some of the other methodologies out there, but a lot of times they're not focused at this level of detail that I think that we have here, which is very important when you're trying to have an opportunity and sell deals that have so many moving parts and so many players.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that the way that you talked about how it provides the different lens, that's really one of the key differentiators is that many methodologies will focus on one particular area, whether it's discovery, negotiations, what have you. But it's how do you take what you have here and apply it here? What does it tell you about this part over here? How does that tie into this aspect over here? All the way from the early discovery conversations about establishing the reason to buy all the way through confirming the ability to execute all the way through. Here's how we're going to go and prove the value that you're going to be getting, and here's how you structure it, all the way to ensuring the execution by both sides is properly attained, and how that all ties together. It's designed intrinsically to not just win this deal, but to establish long-term value and deep relationships with the customer that are going to extend to the next deal and the deal beyond it. It's supposed to extend over time.
Yeah. I mean, let's remember, like, motive without opportunity is just wishful thinking. It's like, and to extend that, without value, you might have the whole thing defined, but you're not communicating it and no one's understanding what the meaning
Right.
of this is. And then, of course, engagement is you've all these things teed up, but you don't use them in any meaningful way to actually move the deal along.
Yeah, exactly. Great
So it's all
ideas with
built.
no execution, right? Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, hey, I think that's a good stopping point for today. If you're interested more in our Move framework, you can, of course, purchase the book. There's a link in the description of the podcast. It's Winning Faster, the Move Framework for Enterprise Sales Success, which is the culmination of combined 50 years of enterprise software selling experience from Kevin and I. All the good, the bad, and the ugly rolled into one, but hopefully a recipe for success for you when you're coming to complex enterprise deals.
Absolutely. Yep. Learn from the things that the lessons that are in there. They're not just best practices. They're wisdoms, which is knowledge born of pain, as it was explained to me by one of my old mentors. So we've got the scar tissue, so you don't have to. Here's the things that worked. Here's the things that will work. So when things don't work, you'll be okay.
Knowledge formed from pain sounds like some tagline for a new Hobbit movie.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Great. I'll think about that one. On that note, hey, it's been great spending time with you this week. Hope you found that valuable. And we'll be back next week with another guest talking about other things that are relevant for enterprise sellers and just the whole sales process, as well as industry trends and other things that might be insightful for you to do your job better. But thanks for joining us this week on Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success. Again, I'm Matt Long, your host, along with Kevin Donville. It's been a pleasure. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All right, folks, drop some comments. Let us know what you think. Ask your questions. We'll see you soon.